flames devoured the Wyoming night, roaring defiance against the blizzard's howl. Silas Boone plunged through the inferno's maw, snow melting to steam on his coat, smoke clawing his throat. Not for the rancher he expected. A stranger writhed, pinned beneath blazing timber. A desperate heave, a splintering crack, and searing agony exploded through Silas's left arm as the beam gave way, trapping them both. Who was this man? Where was Josiah Vance? The fire, in its savage hunger, offered no answers, only consuming light and suffocating dark. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. The Vance homestead wasn't just burning, it was screaming. Each timber popping, each window exploding in a shower of molten glass, was a shriek torn from the heart of the structure. Silas Boone felt those screams vibrate in his own bones as he staggered back from the collapsing doorway. The unconscious weight of the unknown man, a dead burden over his right shoulder. His left arm, from the elbow down, was a ruin of charred cloth, seared flesh, and splintered bone, held on by sinew and sheer, desperate will. The blizzard, indifferent to the human drama, flung ice needles into his face, stinging the raw burns on his cheeks. He stumbled, vision swimming with smoke and pain, the heat at his back a physical shove towards the frozen darkness beyond the fire's greedy reach. He collapsed 20 yards out, rolling the stranger onto the virgin snow. The contrast between the inferno's roar and the sudden, muffled silence of the storm almost as shocking as the injury. He lay there, gasping, the world reduced to the pounding of his heart, the icy kiss of snow on his neck, and the monstrous, alien throb emanating from what remained of his arm. Consciousness flickered. He saw the silhouette of the stranger against the firelight, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, features slack in unconsciousness or death, utterly unfamiliar. Who are you? Where is Josiah? The questions hammered against the wall of agony. Then, darkness swallowed him whole, the fire's roar fading to a distant, malevolent hum. Silas surfaced into a different kind of pain, a deep, persistent throb encased in rough bandages, a stiffness that spoke of days lost. The smell of wood smoke, lye soap, and something cloyingly medicinal filled his nostrils. Weak winter light filtered through a small, grimy window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He was in Doc Henderson's back room in Silver Creek, a place he knew too well from patching up miners and cowhands. Back with us, Silas? Doc Henderson's voice was gravelly, devoid of unnecessary sympathy. He appeared beside the narrow cot, holding a tin cup of water. His eyes, sharp and weary, scanned Silas's face, then lingered on the bulky, bandaged stump resting on a pillow where his left forearm used to be. Took the fever, but you're stubborn as a badger. Arm, well, gangrene set and deep. Had to take it clean above the elbow. Nothing else to be done. The words landed with the weight of an anvil. Silas closed his eyes, not against the physical pain, but against the crushing wave of finality. His arm, his trade, his already precarious existence on the edge of the territory. Gone, reduced to ash and bone fragments in a Vance fire. He swallowed, throat raw. The man, he rasped. Stranger. Doc Henderson helped him sip the water. Burns, broken ribs, smoke in his lungs. Muttered nonsense in his fever. Died 2 nights back. Never knew his name. Sheriff's got him laid out in the ice house, waiting for someone to claim him. No one has. He paused, his gaze turning shrewd. Josiah Vance, he wasn't in that house, Silas. Sheriff Briggs searched the ashes proper once the snow let up. Found traces of a stranger, bits of harness, Josiah's strongbox busted open and empty, but no sign of Josiah himself. Vanished. Silas stared at the rough-hewn ceiling beams. Josiah gone? The man owed him near 3 months' wages for carpentry work on a new barn. A project now just more kindling for the Wyoming wind. More than that, Josiah had been present. A fixture, a stubborn, sometimes foolish, but fundamentally their man. His disappearance felt like a violation of the harsh, predictable order of frontier life. Fire start. Silas managed. Doc Henderson's expression darkened. Briggs ain't saying much, but he's looking mighty thoughtful. Smelled coal, oil strong, near the front porch, he claims. Found a shattered lantern, too. Could be accident, could be something else. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Rumor is Josiah took out a hefty insurance policy on the place just last month. Paid in gold coin, they say. Briggs' check-in with the company back east. The implication hung heavy in the medicinal air. Motive. Arson. Disappearance. Death. Silas turned his head away, looking back out the small window at the snow-covered roofs of Silver Creek. The loss of his arm was a raw, personal catastrophe. Josiah's vanishing act, coupled with the dead stranger and the stink of coal oil, felt like the first tremors of an earthquake threatening to swallow the ground beneath him whole. 3 days later, stiff and hollowed out by pain and morphine, Silas sat bundled on the bench outside the Silver Creek Mercantile, trying to adjust the sling Doc had rigged for his stump. The late afternoon sun offered little warmth. That's when he saw the wagon. It wasn't the usual freight rig or ranch supply run. It was a sturdy, plain farm wagon, driven by Old Man Peterson, the taciturn livery owner. Beside him sat a woman. She wasn't young, perhaps mid-40s, but held herself with a straight-backed resilience that caught Silas's eye even from a distance. Her clothes were practical wool, dark blue and serviceable, but well-cut, hinting at a past life of better means. A worn carpet bag sat at her feet. Her face, beneath the brim of a sensible hat, was pale, etched with the lines of hard living and perhaps harder decisions. But her eyes, as the wagon drew closer, were wide, alert, and scanning the town with an unsettling intensity. They held a deep, watchful intelligence and a flicker of something else, apprehension or maybe steely resolve. Silas felt an inexplicable prickle of unease. Peterson pulled the wagon up near the sheriff's office. The woman climbed down with a grace that belied the fatigue in her posture. She spoke briefly to Peterson, who nodded towards the sheriff's door. She squared her shoulders, took a deep breath that fogged in the cold air, and walked inside. Silas watched her go. There was a stillness about her, a contained energy like water held behind a dam. He didn't know why, but the sight of her tightened the knot of dread that had settled in his gut since the fire. Martha Vance adjusted the worn leather gloves on her hands, a nervous habit she thought she'd conquered years ago. The sheriff's office in Silver Creek smelled of stale tobacco, wood smoke, and cold iron. Sheriff Harlan Briggs was a big man, filling his chair behind a scarred desk, his expression guarded as he studied the letter she'd handed him. Josiah Vance's proposal, carried across 1,000 miles of prairie and hope. Mrs. Vance, Briggs began, his voice a low rumble. "Martha, I'm afraid I got bad news. Dire news." He told her. The fire, the complete destruction of the homestead, the mysterious stranger found dead, Josiah's unexplained absence, the possibility of arson. Martha listened, her face a mask of careful neutrality, but inside, a cold fury warred with a profound, bone-deep weariness. Not again. Dear God, not again. The carefully constructed plan, the promise made to her dying sister Eleanor. Look after Josiah, Martha. He's a good man, just lost. Anchor him. Build something solid. It all seemed to crumble like ash in her hands. The hidden fortune sewn into the lining of her best coat, the small fortune in gold certificates, and the single flawless emerald ring wrapped in oilskin. Her escape, her security, her leverage suddenly felt like a lead weight. His body, she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the tremor in her hands. Not found, Briggs said, watching her closely. Nor hide, nor hair. Makes it complicated. Insurance companies already sniffing around. That stranger, no identification. Just this. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small metal object, placing it on the desk. It was a belt buckle, ornate silver, intricately tooled with a stylized wolf's head, partially melted and blackened by the fire. Found near where Silas Boone pulled him out. Mean anything to you? Martha stared at the buckle. The craftsmanship was unusual, expensive, not Josiah's style at all. A chill unrelated to the Wyoming cold crept up her spine. No, Sheriff. I've never seen it before. She met his gaze. I'd like to see the place. What's left? Briggs sighed. Peterson can take you out tomorrow, weather permitting. It's grim, ma'am. Stay at Ma Gable's boarding house. It's clean. He paused. Silas Boone, fella who tried to rescue the stranger, lost his arm in the doing. He's staying there too. Might be he can tell you more, if he's of a mind. Martha nodded, collecting the proposal letter. The buckle seemed to gleam dully on the desk. A mute, malevolent question mark. A stranger died in the fire meant for her new life. Josiah was gone, and a one-armed carpenter held pieces of the puzzle she desperately needed to solve. The promise to Eleanor tightened around her heart like a vice. She couldn't walk away. Not yet. The ride to the Vance homestead the next morning was a journey through a monochrome hell. Snowdrifts sculpted by the wind lay deep across the trail. Martha sat beside Old Man Peterson, bundled in every layer she possessed, the carpet bag clutched tightly on her lap. The hidden fortune felt heavier than ever. The landscape was vast, empty, breathtakingly beautiful in its desolation, and utterly terrifying. They crested a rise, and Peterson pulled the team to a halt, pointing with a gnarled finger. "There why are, ma'am. What's left of it?" Martha's breath caught. The scene was starkly horrific. Blackened, skeletal timbers clawed at the leaden sky like the ribs of some monstrous, long-dead beast. Snow filled the hollows where rooms had been, drifted against the lone, crumbling chimney stack that stood sentinel over the devastation. The acrid smell of wet ash and charred wood hung heavy in the still, cold air. It wasn't just a burnt house, it was an erasure. Her future, Josiah's life, reduced to this desolate scar on the snow-covered plain. A wave of grief, sharp and unexpected, washed over her. Grief for the sister she'd failed, for the stability she'd sought, for the sheer, brutal waste of it all. She climbed down from the wagon, her boots crunching on the frozen crust of snow covering the ash beneath. Peterson stayed by the horses, giving her space. Martha walked slowly towards the ruins. The silence was profound, broken only by the sigh of the wind through the blackened timbers and the distant cry of a crow. She picked her way through the debris, her eyes scanning the wreckage, not knowing what she sought, only driven by a need to understand. Near where the front porch might have been, half buried in ash and snow, something glinted dully. She knelt, brushing aside the grimy crystals. It was a shard of thick glass, curved perhaps from a shattered kerosene lamp reservoir. Stuck to it, partially burned but still legible, was a fragment of paper. She carefully peeled it off. 2 words, written in a strong, masculine hand she didn't recognize, were scorched but clear. Found it. The rest was ash. Martha stared at the fragment, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Found it? Found what? The insurance money? Something else? Something worth burning for? Worth killing for? Worth disappearing over? A sudden, sharp crack echoed across the frozen ruin, loud as a pistol shot in the immense silence. Martha jerked upright, the paper fragment clutched tight in her gloved hand. Her eyes scanned the skeletal timbers, the snowdrifts, the distant tree line. Nothing moved. Peterson, by the wagon, hadn't reacted. Had it been ice splitting on a beam, a settling timber, or something else? The vast, empty landscape suddenly felt crowded with unseen eyes. The charred ruins seemed to whisper secrets she couldn't decipher. The wind picked up, moaning through the blackened bones of the homestead, carrying with it the faint, metallic scent of snow and something else. Something faintly acrid like old smoke or maybe coal oil. Her gaze snapped back to the lone chimney stack. For a fleeting, impossible second, silhouetted against the gray sky near its top, she thought she saw the briefest shimmer, like heat haze on a summer road. Then it was gone. The crow called again, a harsh, mocking sound. Martha Vance stood alone in the ashes of her promised future, a cryptic message in her hand, the hidden fortune a cold weight against her side, and the chilling certainty that the fire hadn't ended anything. It had only just begun, and she was standing right in the middle of it. The echo of the sharp crack died away, leaving Martha Vance standing rigid in the snow-choked ruins, the scorched paper fragment clenched in her gloved fist. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Found it. Found what? The words burned hotter than the embers beneath the ash. Her gaze darted across the skeletal timbers, probing the deep shadows cast by the lone chimney stack. Nothing moved except the swirling snowflakes. Old man Peterson, huddled by the wagon, seemed oblivious, stamping his feet against the cold. Coal oil, that faint, lingering scent, sharp and unnatural amidst the wet char. And that shimmer, had she imagined it? A trick of exhausted eyes and fraught nerves? Yet, the conviction settled cold and hard. Someone else had been here recently, watching. The vast emptiness of the Wyoming plain suddenly felt claustrophobic, filled with unseen threats. The promise to Eleanor, look after Josiah, felt less like duty and more like a noose tightening. Taking a shaky breath, Martha forced herself towards the chimney. It stood like a broken monument, the only structure defiant against the fire's hunger. Up close, the stones were blackened, some cracked from the intense heat. She scanned the base, kicking aside drifted snow and clumps of frozen ash with her boot. Nothing unusual. Then, her eyes traveled upwards. Near the top, just below the crumbling crown, a section of mortar looked disturbed. Fresher? Or just damaged differently? It was impossible to tell from the ground. The fleeting shimmer she thought she'd seen flickered in her memory. Ghosts or guilt? She wondered grimly. Neither offered comfort. "See enough, ma'am?" Peterson's call was muffled by the wind. "Storm's brewing worse. Best head back." Martha nodded, casting one last, lingering look at the desolation. This was to have been her refuge, her fresh start. Now, it was a grave for her hopes and a stranger. But walking away felt like abandoning Eleanor all over again. She tucked the paper fragment deep into her coat pocket, next to the hidden inner lining where her fortune and her burden rested. The emerald ring seemed to pulse against her skin, a cold, hard secret. "I'll need a ride out again tomorrow, Mr. Peterson," she stated, her voice firmer than she felt as she climbed back onto the wagon bench. And directions to Ma Gables. Back in the cramped, overly warm confines of Ma Gables' boarding house, the smell of stew and coal smoke couldn't quite mask the pervasive scent of damp wool and loneliness. Martha secured a small room at the top of the stairs, Spartan but clean. Her first act was to carefully peel back the lining of her best coat. The oilskin packet was intact. She didn't unwrap it, merely feeling the stiff rectangles of the gold certificates and the distinct shape of the ring. Security, and a target if anyone knew. She sewed the lining shut again with quick, practiced stitches, the needle flashing in the dim light. The cryptic paper fragment she placed inside a small, empty tobacco tin she found in the dresser drawer. Found it. The words echoed. Descending to the common room for supper, she felt the weight of curious stares. Silver Creek was small. News traveled faster than the stagecoach. The room held a handful of boarders, two dusty cowhands arguing quietly over a hand of cards, a traveling drummer nursing a beer, and a gaunt woman knitting fiercely by the stove. And then, in the far corner, near the window overlooking the frozen Main Street, said a man Martha recognized instantly from Doc Henderson's description and her own glimpse outside the mercantile. Silas Boone. He sat hunched slightly, favoring his right side. His left sleeve was pinned up neatly above the elbow, the absent stark beneath his worn flannel shirt. He was attempting to eat stew with his right hand, movements stiff and deliberate, frustration etched into the tight lines around his mouth and eyes. He fumbled the spoon, sending a splash of broth onto the scarred tabletop. A low curse escaped him, bitten off and harsh. He slammed his right fist down softly, a gesture of utter impotence that resonated louder than any shout. His gaze, when it lifted and met Martha's across the room, was a storm of pain, anger, and a deep, weary resignation. It was the look of a man who had already lost too much and knew he was staring down the barrel of losing everything else. Martha hesitated, then walked towards him. The room's chatter dipped slightly. "Mr. Boone." Her voice was calm, level. He looked up, his eyes wary, assessing. He saw a woman not bowed by the day's horrors, though the strain showed in the tightness around her own eyes. He saw resilience, and perhaps a shared understanding of ruin. "Ma'am," he acknowledged, his voice gravelly. He didn't offer a chair. "Martha Vance," she said, "I believe you tried to save someone at Josiah's place." A muscle ticked in Silas's jaw. Tried. The word was bitter. He gestured vaguely with his stump. "Got this for a stranger." Josiah vanished. He studied her face, looking for what? Grief? Guilt? "You were coming to marry him." "I was," Martha confirmed, pulling out the chair opposite him without invitation. She sat, folding her hands on the table. "I also made a promise to my sister, Eleanor, his first wife, to look after him." She didn't elaborate on Eleanor's fears of Josiah's restlessness, his tendency towards grand, often ill-advised schemes. "The sheriff told me what you did. Risked your life." "Lost," she trailed off, indicating his arm with a slight nod. "I'm sorry." Silas looked away, out the window at the gathering dusk. "Sorry don't raise barns or pay debts." His voice was flat. "Josiah owed me. For work. A lot of work. Now." He lifted his right shoulder in a helpless shrug. The unspoken question hung heavy. What use is a one-armed carpenter? Martha leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "The sheriff showed me a belt buckle. Silver. Wolf's head. Found near the stranger. Mean anything to you?" Silas's eyes snapped back to hers, sharper now. He shook his head slowly. "Never seen it on Josiah. Stranger wore plain gear, from what I recall before." He swallowed, the memory of the fire clearly raw. "But I wasn't looking at his belt." He paused, a flicker of something else in his eyes, suspicion, or perhaps just the ingrained caution of a man who'd learned trust was costly. "Why? You know it." "No," Martha admitted. "Just out of place. Like the man himself." She hesitated, then decided. "I found something else out there today. In the ashes." She didn't pull out the tin, but described the glass shard in the two words. "Found it." Silas stared at her, his brow furrowed. "Found it?" The phrase echoed the sheriff's rumor about Josiah and the insurance policy. Was it the gold? Or something else? The empty strongbox. "Josiah was digging around the old root cellar weeks back," Silas muttered, almost to himself. Said he was clearing rubble. Seemed excited. Secretive. Then he took that trip to Cheyenne. Came back quiet. Different. He met Martha's gaze again. Could be nothing. Or everything. Martha finished quietly. A spark of connection passed between them. Not warmth, but a recognition of shared ground in a landscape of unknowns and danger. Silas knew the place, the man. Martha had resources and a driving purpose. Both were damaged, adrift. Their tense communion was broken by the heavy tread of boots and the jingle of spurs. Sheriff Briggs filled the doorway, brushing snow from his coat. His eyes swept the room, lingering on Silas and Martha together. His expression was unreadable, but the scrutiny was palpable. "Mrs. Vance." "Boone." He approached their table, his presence imposing. "Settling in." His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. "Heard you went out to the homestead. See anything unusual? Besides the obvious ruin?" Martha kept her expression neutral. "Only the devastation, Sheriff, and the cold." She omitted the paper fragment, the sense of being watched, the shimmer. Instinct screamed caution. Briggs grunted, his gaze shifting to Silas. "Doc says you're mend in. Good. Need you sharp, Boone. Got a fella coming in tomorrow. Represent the Great Plains Assurance Company. Wants to talk about Josiah's policy. And that fire." His eyes hardened slightly. "He'll likely want words with you too, Mrs. Vance. Seeing as you were set to be beneficiary in a manner of speaking." The implication was clear. Motive. Martha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the draft from the door. "I never even met the man, Sheriff. My agreement was with Josiah directly." "Be that as it may," Briggs said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "He'll be asking questions. Best be prepared." He touched the brim of his hat. "Evening." He turned and left, the door banging shut behind him, leaving a heavier silence in his wake. Silas pushed his half-eaten stew away, his appetite gone. "Vultures," he muttered, circling before the bodies, even cold. He looked at Martha, a new wariness in his eyes, mixed with a grudging understanding. The insurance man saw her as a suspect. Silas, indebted and now crippled, was hardly above suspicion either. The fire had bound them in more ways than one. Later, lying in the narrow bed in her dark room, Martha listened to the wind howling around the eaves of Ma Gables. The events of the day tumbled through her mind. The desolate ruin, the cryptic message, the watchful sheriff, the insurance threat, and Silas Boone's raw anguish. She thought of the emerald ring, a legacy from a life she'd fled, now possibly the only means to salvage anything from this wreckage. Could she use it? Should she? To rebuild? To find Josiah? To fulfill her promise? A floorboard creaked softly in the hallway outside her door. Martha froze, her breath catching. It could be another boarder heading to the privy, but the step had been hesitant. Close. Too close to her door. She lay perfectly still, straining to hear over the wind's moan. Silence stretched, thick and menacing. Then a faint, almost imperceptible scratching sound. Not at the door latch, but lower down, near the floor, like something being gently slid beneath the door. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Seconds ticked by like hours. The scratching stopped. A soft rustle, then retreating footsteps, moving swiftly and quietly down the hall towards the stairs. When the silence had held for a full minute, Martha slipped silently from the bed. She crept to the door, her bare feet cold on the rough boards. Kneeling, she felt along the floor in the darkness. Her fingers brushed against a small, stiff rectangle of paper. She snatched it up and retreated to the sliver of moonlight filtering through the window. It wasn't paper. It was a photograph, old and creased, its edges worn. The image was dim, but unmistakable. It showed a younger Josiah Vance, his arm around a beaming Eleanor, Martha's sister. They looked happy, but it wasn't their faces that stopped Martha's breath. Scrawled across the bottom of the photograph, in a hurried, jagged hand unlike Josiah's careful script, were two words, thick and dark like dried blood. "Stay gone." A wave of icy dread washed over her. She wasn't just standing in the middle of it. Someone knew she was here, and they wanted her out, or dead. The wind screamed against the window pane, a banshee's wail in the Wyoming night. The jagged scrawl, "Stay gone," bled into the faded image of Eleanor's smile. Martha Vance stood frozen in the thin moonlight, the creased photograph icy in her fingers. The wind outside Ma Gables wasn't just howling now. It felt like a chorus of unseen voices screaming the warning. Someone knew she was here, knew her connection, knew her resolve. And they wanted her erased from Silver Creek as thoroughly as Josiah's homestead. Fear, cold and sharp as the Wyoming night, pricked her skin. But beneath it, Fueled by the ghost of her sister's trusting eyes in the photo, a harder emotion ignited: defiance. Fleeing wasn't an option. Not for Eleanor. Not anymore. She carefully tucked the photograph back into the tobacco tin, hiding it beneath a loose floorboard near the bed. The hidden fortune in her coat lining felt less like security and more like a target painted on her back. She checked the stitches, still secure. The emerald ring seemed to pulse, a cold, green heartbeat against her ribs. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old boarding house, every moan of the wind, felt like the return of the stealthy footsteps. At dawn, pale and hollow-eyed, she descended to find Silas Boone already in the common room. He sat by the cold hearth, wrestling with a simple leather strap on his worn saddlebag. His right hand fumbled the buckle, his teeth gritted in frustration, the pin sleeve his stark accusation against the dim light. The raw vulnerability in his struggle, the mighty carpenter reduced to battling a buckle, struck Martha deeper than any words. Here was another casualty of the fire, another soul trapped in the ruins of Josiah Vance's disappearance. She approached quietly. "Mr. Boone." He flinched, snapping his head up. His eyes, shadowed and haunted, held a flicker of surprise, then wary resignation. He didn't speak, just watched her, the useless strap dangling. "Someone left a message under my door last night," Martha stated, her voice low and steady despite the tremor inside. She described the photograph, the scrawled warning, the silent footsteps. She omitted the hiding place, but the fear was plain enough. Silas's expression hardened. He abandoned the strap. "Stay gone," he echoed, the words rough. "Means they know you ain't easily scared off. Or they figure you know something." He rubbed his face with his right hand, a gesture of weary calculation. "Briggs? Ma Gable? Peterson? Half the town knew you were heading out to the homestead yesterday. Any one of them could have slipped that under your door. Or someone who didn't want me going back," Martha countered. She pulled out the tobacco tin, opening it just enough to show the edge of the photograph. "Look at the writing. Jagged. Hurried. Angry. Not the sheriff's steady hand, I'd wager. And why this photo? Why Eleanor? It feels personal." Silas stared at the tin, then met her gaze. A spark of shared understanding passed between them. The understanding of prey, recognizing another in the hunter's sights. "Root cellar," he said abruptly, the memory triggered. Josiah was obsessed with it weeks before the fire. Said the original homesteaders might have stored valuables there. Dug like a man possessed. "Found something, I reckon. Got cagey. Then that trip to Cheyenne." He trailed off, his brow furrowed. "That buckle the sheriff has wolf's head. Fancy work. I've seen its like before." His gaze turned distant, inward, touching a painful past. Back, during the troubles near the Powder River, raiders sometimes wore such trinkets. Mercenaries, men who sold their guns to the highest bidder. A muscle jumped in his jaw. War. Loss. The ghosts were close to the surface. The implication hung heavy. Had Josiah stumbled onto something valuable enough to attract dangerous men? Had the stranger been one of them? The cryptic "found it" fragment took on a darker, more ominous meaning. "We need to see that cellar," Martha said, the decision solidifying. "Before the snow buries it deeper. Before they go back." Silas looked down at his pinned sleeve, then at the stubborn saddlebag buckle. A wave of bitter frustration washed over him. "Easy to say," he muttered. "Digging ain't a one-handed chore." "Then we improvise," Martha stated, her practical nature surfacing. "I can dig. You can look. You know the layout. You know what doesn't belong." It wasn't pity, it was strategy. They needed each other's eyes, each other's knowledge. Before Silas could respond, the front door banged open, letting in a blast of frigid air and Sheriff Briggs. Close behind him was a man who seemed carved from ice. Tall, impeccably dressed in a city-cut suit beneath a heavy wool overcoat. His face was long and pale, his eyes the color of tarnished silver behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He carried a slim leather case. "Mrs. Vance." "Boone." Briggs nodded, his expression unreadable. "This here's Mr. Alastair Thorne, from the Great Plains Assurance Company." Thorne removed his gloves with precise, deliberate movements. His gaze swept over Martha, cool and assessing, then lingered dismissively on Silas's pinned sleeve before settling back on Martha. "Mrs. Vance." A regrettable introduction under such tragic circumstances. His voice was smooth, cultured, devoid of warmth. "I am here regarding the policy held by Josiah Vance on his property and assets. A significant sum, payable upon confirmed loss." He emphasized confirmed. "I understand, Mr. Thorne," Martha replied, keeping her voice level, "though I fail to see what assistance I can be. As I told the sheriff, I never met Mr. Vance. Yet you stand to potentially benefit," Thorne stated, not a question. He opened his case, extracting a document. The policy lists Eleanor Vance as primary beneficiary. Upon her regrettable passing, the secondary beneficiary clause names lawful spouse at time of incident, which, according to the contractual agreement facilitated by the matchmaker's correspondence, would appear to be you, Mrs. Vance. He peered at her over his spectacles. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? Arriving just as the homestead burns and Mr. Vance vanishes. Martha felt the blood drain from her face. Beneficiary? The trap was suddenly, horrifyingly clear. Her hidden fortune meant nothing against this accusation. "I knew nothing of any policy, Mr. Thorne. My agreement was solely with Josiah." "Of course," Thorne murmured, his tone implying the opposite. He turned his tarnished silver gaze on Silas. "And you, Mr. Boone, I understand you were present at the inception of the fire. Sustained a grievous injury attempting a rescue. Heroic, or perhaps fortuitous? I've reviewed the preliminary findings. Traces of accelerant, a shattered lantern, a vanished policyholder, a dead stranger, and a substantial debt owed to you by Vance, now uncollectible." He let the insinuation hang. "The company requires a thorough investigation before any settlement can be considered. Suspicion of fraud, you understand, carries severe penalties." His eyes flickered back to Martha. For all involved, Briggs shifted his weight, his expression stony. "Thorne's got questions. Lots of them. For both of you. Separately. Start now." He gestured towards a small, cold parlor off the common room. "Mrs. Vance, if you please." Martha met Silas's eyes. The insurance man saw only motives: greed, debt, desperation. He didn't see the promise to Eleanor, the hidden fortune, the warning in the night. He saw fuel for denial. Silas gave an almost imperceptible nod, a warning to be careful. The fragile alliance felt like their only shield. Thorne's interrogation was relentless, a surgical dissection of her journey, her correspondence with Josiah, her knowledge of his affairs, none, and her actions since arriving. He probed about Eleanor, about her own past, his cold eyes missing nothing. Martha answered truthfully where she could, deflected where she must, her mind racing. The threat of fraud was a noose tightening. Could her hidden fortune condemn her further if discovered? Released an hour later, pale and shaken, she found Silas waiting outside the parlor, his face grim. Thorne had clearly worked him over too. "Vulture," Silas spat under his breath as Thorne and Briggs conferred quietly near the door. "Sniffing for blood money. Thinks we cooked it up between us." He flexed his right hand, the knuckles white. "We need that cellar, Martha. Today, before Briggs or that buzzard decides to post a guard on the ruins." Peterson, when approached, was reluctant. "Storm's coming in earnest this afternoon, Mrs. Vance. Heavy snow. You get caught out there. We'll be quick," Martha insisted, pressing coins into his hand. The emerald ring felt like it was burning a hole through her coat. Silas said nothing, his jaw set, the frustration of his helplessness fueling a desperate determination. The ride to the Vance place was tense, the sky a bruised purple-gray, the wind carrying the first stinging pellets of snow. The ruins looked even more desolate, more haunted under the threatening sky. Silas directed Peterson to what remained of the barn's foundation, partially sheltered from the worst of the wind. Cellar trapdoor was near the back corner of the house, he said, pointing toward the snow-drifted mound of blackened debris near the lone chimney. Under where the kitchen stood, they waded through ash and snow, Martha wielding the shovel Peterson had reluctantly provided. Silas scanned the wreckage, using his good arm to shift smaller charred timbers, his movements awkward but purposeful. The chimney loomed over them, its stones seeming darker, more oppressive. Martha dug, the shovel biting into the frozen muck and ash. The silence was profound, broken only by the wind's moan, the scrape of the shovel, and Silas's labored breathing. The scent of wet ash and something faintly oily, coal oil, clung to the air. Suddenly, Silas stiffened. "Oh!" He crouched, brushing snow and char from a section of warped, half-buried planking. "Here, trapdoor frame." He strained, trying to lift a heavy, charred beam, pinning it down with his one arm. It barely budged. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold. Blast it! The curse was raw with impotent fury. Martha jammed the shovel into the snow and threw her weight against the beam alongside him. It shifted grudgingly, revealing a corner of a heavy, iron-banded trapdoor beneath. Hope flared. They heaved again, muscles screaming. The beam moved another inch. As they strained, Martha glanced up towards the chimney top. Was it the wind, or a trick of the failing light? She thought she saw that same brief, heat-hazed shimmer near the crumbling crown. A cold draft, unrelated to the wind, seemed to swirl around her ankles, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that sounded like, "Ellie," she gasped, losing her grip. The beam settled back with a thud. "What?" Silas panted, looking at her sharply. "Nothing." Martha breathed, shaking her head, dismissing the eerie sensation as nerves and exhaustion. Wind playing tricks. She refused to give the fear purchase. She repositioned the shovel, wedging it under the beam for leverage. Again, with a final, combined heave, they shifted the beam just enough to expose the trapdoor's rusted iron ring. Martha grabbed it, bracing her feet. It was frozen shut. She pulled with all her strength. It groaned, resisted, then gave with a shriek of protesting metal. A rush of cold, damp, earth-scented air wafted up from the darkness below. Silas pulled a small bullseye lantern from his coat, striking a match. The feeble yellow beam pierced the gloom, illuminating rough-hewn stone steps descending into blackness. Before they could move, a voice cut through the wind, sharp and cold as the gathering storm. "Find in something interesting, folks?" They whirled. Leaning against the blackened skeleton of a porch post, partially obscured by blowing snow, stood a figure they hadn't heard approach. He wore a heavy buffalo coat, the collar turned up, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. A rifle rested casually in the crook of his arm, but it was the glint of metal on his belt that caught the lantern light and froze the blood in Martha's veins. An ornate silver buckle, intricately tooled with the stylized head of a wolf. The wolf's head buckle gleamed dully in the storm's gray light, a malevolent eye fixed on them. The figure leaned against the charred post, snow dusting his buffalo coat shoulders, the rifle held with casual menace. Silas Boone's blood ran cold. He knew that buckle, not just its likeness, but the specific, heavy weight of it, the intricate swirls around the snarling muzzle. It was the twin of the one found on the dead stranger. Just admiring the view, the man drawled, his voice rough as gravel, muffled by his raised collar. "Didn't reckon on company, especially not folks poking around where they ain't wanted." His eyes, shadowed beneath the hat brim, flickered between Silas's pinned sleeve and Martha's pale, determined face. "You the widow? Heard you got a message. Didn't take the hint, I see." Martha's hand tightened on the shovel handle, knuckles white. Fear warred with fury. This was the threat made flesh. Who are you? Her voice cut through the wind's moan, sharper than she felt. A humorless chuckle rasped from the figure. Call me a concerned citizen. Place is dangerous. Unstable. He gestured vaguely at the blackened timbers with a rifle barrel. Wouldn't want more accidents. His gaze lingered pointedly on Silas's missing arm. Heard about your misfortune, Boone. Real shame. Skill man, they said. What use are you now? The barb struck deep, twisting the knife of Silas's helplessness. Rage, hot and familiar, surged, the same rage that had carried him through skirmishes in the Dakota Badlands, the same that had fueled his flight from the ghost that haunted him there. He stepped slightly in front of Martha, shielding her with his body as best he could. We're leaving, he stated, his voice low and dangerous. No trouble. Leave it. The man pushed off the post, taking a step closer. Snow crunched under his heavy boots. Just when you found something interesting, he nodded towards the yawning cellar trapdoor. What you hoping to dig up down there, widow? Vance's bones? Or something shinier? Silas's mind raced. The man knew about the cellar. He knew about the warning. He was connected to the dead stranger. But was he alone? Peterson waited with the wagon, but he was an old man, no match for a rifle. Silas's right hand flexed uselessly. He needed leverage, distraction. Found nothing but rot, Martha said, her voice surprisingly steady. She nudged the shovel slightly with her boot, a subtle movement. Just curious. Place belonged to my intended. She met the shadowed gaze, refusing to flinch. You seem mighty interested yourself. Knew Josiah. The figure's posture shifted, a fractional tightening. Knew of him. Man who talked too much to the wrong folks. Stirred up hornets. He took another step, closing the distance. The rifle muzzle swung slightly, centering on Silas's chest. Curiosity killed the cat, widow, and the cripple. Best you both just ride on. Forget Silver Creek. Forget Vance. Silas saw the man's finger tighten minutely on the trigger. Instinct screamed. He couldn't fight, but he could build. React. He lunged sideways, not towards the man, but towards the heavy, half-shifted char beam near the trapdoor. He threw his full weight against it with his right shoulder, a desperate, guttural cry tearing from his throat. The beam, precariously balanced, groaned and shifted again, crashing down towards the figure's legs. The man cursed, stumbling back instinctively to avoid the falling timber, his rifle swinging wide. It was the split second Martha needed. She didn't hesitate. She swung the shovel not as a weapon, but as a hook, catching the man's ankle and yanking hard. He lost his footing on the icy ash, crashing backwards with a heavy thud, the rifle flying from his grasp. Go! Silas roared at Martha, already scrambling towards the rifle half buried in the snow. The figure was quick, rolling and surging up, a knife flashing in his hand now. Hatred burned in his eyes. Silas dove, his right hand closing on the rifle stock just as the man lunged. The knife sliced through air where Silas's neck had been. Silas rolled, bringing the rifle up awkwardly with one hand, fumbling for the trigger. A shot cracked, deafening in the confined space of the ruins. Not from Silas's rifle. Snow kicked up near the struggling men. Old man Peterson stood by the wagon, his ancient buffalo rifle smoking, his face pale but resolute. Next one finds flesh, he yelled, his voice cracking. The knife-wielding man froze, glaring from Peterson to Silas, now struggling to his knees with the rifle pointed shakily. He spat into the snow. This ain't over. His gaze, venomous and final, locked on Martha. Stay gone, widow. Or next time, no warnings. He backed away swiftly, melting into the swirling snow and skeletal timbers towards the tree-line, disappearing as suddenly as he'd appeared. Silas slumped, gasping, the rifle heavy in his hand. Pain radiated from his shoulder where he'd hit the beam, a fresh agony layered over the constant throb of his missing limb. Martha rushed to him, her face ashen. Are you hurt? Nothing new, he rasped, pushing himself up with her help. He looked at Peterson, nodding grim thanks. The old man just lowered his rifle, his hands trembling. "Cellar," Martha breathed, her eyes darting to the dark opening. "We're here. We have to look. Now." Peterson shook his head vehemently. "That fellow'll be back with friends. We gotta go." Silas looked at the gaping maw of the cellar, then at Martha's fierce determination. The man's words echoed, stirred up hornets. Something shinier. They were close. Too close to stop now. 2 minutes, he said to Peterson. "Cover the door. Give us 2 minutes." Peterson muttered a curse, but nodded, raising his rifle again, scanning the swirling snow. Silas grabbed the bullseye lantern, its beam weak but steady. Martha took the shovel. They descended the rough stone steps into damp, frigid darkness. The air smelled of wet earth, decay, and something else faintly metallic. The steps were slick. Silas moved cautiously, his balance precarious without his left arm, the lantern beam jerking erratically. Martha followed close, her breath fogging in the chill. The cellar was small, maybe 10 feet square, lined with crumbling stone. Root vegetables long rotted into slime littered the corners. But in the center, the earth floor had been disturbed recently. A section, roughly 3 feet square, had been dug up and partially refilled. Josiah's digging. Martha didn't wait. She drove the shovel into the loose earth. Silas held the lantern high, its light revealing crude tool marks on the stones. Frantic scrapes, not careful excavation. Josiah had been desperate. Martha's shovel struck something solid, not rock but wood. She cleared the earth frantically. It was a small, iron-bound chest, identical to the empty strongbox found in the house ashes, but intact. Unlocked. Heart pounding, Martha lifted the lid. No gold coins. Instead, nestled in burlap, lay several items. A thick sheaf of folded papers, land surveys, maps of the territory marked with cryptic symbols, and correspondence bearing unfamiliar letterheads. A small, worn leather pouch, heavy with raw gold nuggets, a prospector's poke. A single gleaming object that made Martha gasp. A silver brooch, exquisitely crafted in the shape of a coiled serpent, its eyes tiny, dark emeralds. It was utterly foreign to the rough, frontier setting. Silas reached in, his hand trembling slightly, and pulled out the top document from the sheaf. It was a deed, but not for the Vance homestead. It described a parcel of land far to the west, near the Wind River Range, marked with a complex surveyor's code. Scribbled in Josiah's familiar hand in the margin was a single, fevered note. Eleanor was right. The Spaniard's cash is real. Thorn knows. Danger. Thorn, the insurance agent. The Spaniard's cash? Legends of lost conquistador gold haunted the Rockies. Was this what Josiah had found? What got him killed? Martha touched the serpent brooch, its emerald eyes cold. It felt ancient, heavy with secrets. A faint vibration seemed to emanate from it. Or was it just her pulse hammering? The damp air stirred, carrying a whisper so faint it might have been the settling earth. "Careful, Marty," Eleanor's childhood nickname for her. Martha froze, the hair on her neck rising. A sharp whistle pierced the silence above, Peterson's warning signal. "Time's up," Silas hissed, stuffing the deed back into the chest. "Grab it. Go." Martha scooped the brooch and the pouch of nuggets in her coat pockets, the papers under her arm. Silas slammed the chest shut. They scrambled back up the slick steps, Silas pushing Martha ahead, his breath ragged with effort and pain. They burst out into the blinding snow. Peterson was backing towards them, his rifle pointed towards a tree line. "Riders," he yelled. "Coming fast. 3 of them." Silas shoved the small chest at Martha. "Get to the wagon." He turned, raising the captured rifle one-handed, bracing it awkwardly against his hip. He squinted into the swirling white. Shapes materialized, horsemen, closing in fast, rifles visible. Peterson fired a warning shot high. The riders didn't slow. Martha reached the wagon, heaving the chest onto the bed. Silas fired towards the lead rider, the shot going wide, the recoil jarring his injured shoulder. He staggered back. Peterson fired again, the shot closer this time. One rider's horse shied, but they kept coming, fanning out. "Silas!" Martha screamed. He turned, stumbling through the snow towards the wagon. Peterson scrambled onto the driver's seat, grabbing the reins. Martha reached out, grabbing Silas's arm, hauling him up just as he reached the wagon step. A shot cracked, splintering the wood near Martha's hand. "Go! Peterson, go!" Silas yelled, shoving Martha fully into the wagon bed and tumbling in after her. The old man snapped the reins. The wagon lurched forward, horses plunging through the deepening snow. Bullets whined past them, kicking up snow. Martha huddled low, clutching the chest, the serpent brooch a cold, accusing weight in her pocket. Silas lay on his back, gasping, trying to lever himself up to return fire with the one rifle they had left. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the storm's roar and the gunfire, the piercing shriek of a steam whistle. A plume of black smoke rose above the treeline, stark against the gray sky. The stagecoach from Cheyenne, arriving early, fighting the storm. The pursuing riders reined in abruptly, milling in confusion near the trail to town. Shooting near witnesses, near the stage, was a different proposition. They watched, dark silhouettes against the snow, as Peterson's wagon careened towards Silver Creek and the sanctuary of witnesses. Martha looked back at the receding ruins. Near the lone chimney, she saw it again, that impossible heat-haze shimmer, stronger now, almost forming a shape, a woman's shape. Then it vanished. The wind carried a final, mournful sigh that sounded like Eleanor's voice. "Run!" As they rattled into the outskirts of Silver Creek, the stagecoach pulling into the depot, Martha looked down at the small chest. Thorne knew. Danger. Josiah's frantic warning. And she had proof. Proof that could condemn them further or finally reveal the truth. Sheriff Briggs stood outside his office, watching their frantic arrival. Alastair Thorne beside him, his tarnished silver eyes narrowing as he saw the iron-bound chest in Martha's arms. The vulture had seen the carrion. The hornets were swarming, and the storm, both outside and within, was far from over. The wagon clattered into Silver Creek like a harbinger of chaos. Martha clutching the iron-bound chest, Silas bleeding and gasping beside her. Alastair Thorne's tarnished silver eyes gleamed with predatory interest as he watched from beside Sheriff Briggs. The stagecoach hissed steam nearby, disgorging bewildered passengers into the swirling snow. "What in blazes happened out there?" Briggs demanded, striding forward as Peterson reined in the panting horses. His gaze swept over Silas's fresh injuries, Martha's ashen face, the chest. "Who was shooting?" "Higher guns, Sheriff," Peterson rasped, pointing a trembling finger back towards the trail. "Wolf's Head Buckle. Try to finish what they started at the Vance place." Thorne stepped forward smoothly, ignoring the accusation. "That chest, Mrs. Vance. It appears remarkably similar to the one found empty in the homestead ashes. Where did you acquire it?" His voice was silk over steel. Martha met his gaze, defiance hardening her resolve. She'd promised Eleanor. She'd survived bullets and threats. She wouldn't be cowed by this vulture. "From Josiah's root cellar, Mr. Thorne, where you apparently knew he'd been digging. Care to explain your interest?" She saw the flicker of surprise, quickly masked in his eyes. "Thorne knows. Danger." Josiah's warning burned in her mind. "My interest," Thorne replied icily, "is protecting my company from fraud." Vance took out a substantial policy shortly after acquiring certain documents. "Documents, I suspect, are in that chest. Hand it over." "Now." "Not so fast," Briggs interjected, his hand resting near his pistol. His eyes darted between Thorne, Martha, and Silas. "Boone, you look like hell warmed over. You two get inside the office. Now, Thorne, you two. We're sorting this out proper." The sheriff's office was cramped and smelled of cold iron, stale coffee, and tension. Martha placed the chest on Briggs's scarred desk. Silas slumped into a chair, gritting his teeth against the pain in his shoulder, his stump throbbing anew. Thorne stood rigidly, his gaze fixed on the chest. "Open it," Briggs ordered Martha. She did, revealing the maps, the pouch of raw nuggets, the serpent brooch, and the folded papers. Briggs picked up the deed with the scribbled note. "Wind River, Spaniard's cache, Thorne knows. Danger." He read aloud, his brow furrowing. He looked sharply at Thorne. "What's this about?" Thorne's composure cracked slightly. Preposterous frontier myth. Vance was delusional, chasing fool's gold. He likely fabricated documents to inflate his assets for the insurance valuation. A clear case of fraud. "Then why?" Silas spoke up, his voice raw but steady. "Was a dead man wearing a wolf's head buckle like the ones worn by Powder River mercenaries? Why did another one try to kill us today? Why slip a warning under Martha's door? Doesn't smell like fraud, Thorne. Smells like you hired muscle to scare Vance off his find or silence him." Thorne's face tightened. Wild speculation from a crippled carpenter deep in debt to a dead man. The word crippled hung in the air. Silas flinched, but Martha saw the fire ignite in his eyes. Not just rage, but the fierce ingenuity of his trade. He pushed himself up. "Debt's paid in blood. Thorne. Mine." He pointed a shaking finger at the brooch Martha still held. "That ain't frontier junk. Look at the work. Look at the stones. Spanish colonial. Late 1600s, maybe. Josiah found something real. And you knew. You knew because he came to you, didn't he? Needed capital to excavate. You saw a bigger payout, the insurance and the cash." Thorne's mask slipped completely. Greed and desperation warred on his face. He was a fool, babbling about maps and curses. The cache is cursed, they say. He attracted scavengers, like that dead stranger. One of Rafe Coulter's men? No doubt. Coulter's got a wolf's head brand and a reputation. Vance panicked, hid the evidence in the cellar. The fire was likely Coulter's man getting too eager, or Vance trying to destroy everything in his madness. His eyes darted to the chest. But the proof is here, and it belongs to the company now to offset the fraudulent claim. "Josiah didn't start the fire," Martha said quietly, the pieces clicking. She held up the serpent brooch. It felt strangely warm now, humming faintly. He was hiding from them, in a root cellar. The mercenary, Coulter's man, searched the house, found nothing. Spilled a lantern, maybe fighting with Josiah? The fire trapped Josiah below. The image was horrifyingly clear. Josiah, terrified, barricaded in his own cellar as flames roared above. The mercenary overcome by smoke or flames himself. He didn't vanish, Sheriff. He's still down there, under the ashes we just disturbed. A wave of sorrow washed over her, not for Josiah the man, but for Eleanor's love for him, now truly laid to rest. Briggs paled. Good Lord. He looked at Thorne with dawning disgust. You knew Coulter was sniffing around? You knew Vance was scared? And you still pushed the policy, hoping the fire would cover your tracks to the cache. Before Thorne could spit a denial, the office door burst open. A snow-covered figure stumbled in, mock Gable, her face stricken. Sheriff, riders, half a dozen, hard men, surrounding the boarding house. They're looking for her. She pointed at Martha. One's got that fancy wolf buckle. Coulter. He tracked them. Thorne's eyes widened in genuine fear. His hired muscle had become his executioners. Silas moved. Ignoring the pain, he grabbed the pouch of gold nuggets from the chest and thrust it at Briggs. Sheriff, that's proof of Josiah's find. Use it to deputize anyone with a gun who ain't scared. He turned to Martha, his gaze intense. The homestead. It ends there, where it began. He saw her understanding. It was isolated. It drew Coulter away from the town. And Eleanor was there. Briggs hesitated only a second, then nodded grimly, grabbing his shotgun and shells. Gable, sound the alarm. Thorne, you're under guard. He shoved the stunned insurance agent toward his cell. The ride back to the Vance place was a blur of stinging snow and grim purpose. Martha drove Silas's small sled, Silas beside her, cradling Briggs's spare rifle. The sheriff followed with two hastily deputized townsfolk. As they neared the ruins, figures materialized from the swirling white near the lone chimney. Coulter and his men, dismounted, weapons ready. "There's the widow!" Coulter's voice, the same gravelly menace from before, rang out. He stepped forward, his wolf's head buckle gleaming. "Hand over the chest and the trinket, and maybe you walk away. Thorne's finished. The cash is mine now." Silas stood, swaying slightly but upright. "Cash is cursed, Coulter. Like Thorne said, took Vance. Took your man. It'll take you too." He raised his voice. "Josiah Vance is buried right here, under your feet. You burned him alive." The accusation hung in the icy air. Coulter spat. "Accident. He shouldn't have hid." He raised his rifle. "Last chance, widow." Martha felt the serpent brooch grow warm against her skin, almost vibrating. She looked towards the chimney. The shimmer was back, intense, coalescing. Not heat haze. A figure. Eleanor. Transparent, sorrowful, yet resolute. Her gaze fixed on Coulter. A whisper, carried on the wind, only Martha and Silas seemed to hear. "Justice." As Coulter's finger tightened on the trigger, Silas didn't aim at him. He fired at the base of the lone, precariously leaning chimney stack. The shot echoed. A crack splintered the ancient mortar. Silas fired again, higher. Another crack. He wasn't fighting with a gun. He was fighting like a carpenter, finding the weakness in the structure. "Bring it down, Silas." Martha yelled, understanding. Coulter, realizing too late, swung his rifle toward Silas. Briggs and the deputies opened fire from the flank, forcing Coulter's men to scatter. Silas fired a third shot, point blank at the critical stress point he'd identified. With a groan that sounded like the earth itself protesting, the massive chimney stack shuddered. Stones began to rain down. Coulter looked up, frozen for a fatal second. The crumbling crown of the chimney, tons of rock and mortar, collapsed directly onto him and the two men closest to him. The impact was thunderous, a cloud of pulverized stone and snow billowing out. The remaining mercenaries stared in horror, then turned and fled into the blizzard, pursued by the deputy's shots. Silence descended, broken only by the moaning wind and the settling dust. The ruins were now truly a grave, for Josiah, for Coulter, for the stranger, and for the greed that had consumed them. Martha walked forward, the brooch cool and still now. Near the massive pile of rubble, she saw Eleanor's shimmering form one last time. Her sister smiled, a smile of profound peace and release, then faded like mist in the snow. The whisper came, gentle now, "Thank you, Marty. Be strong." Briggs approached, surveying the devastation. "Well," he sighed, holstering his pistol, "reckon that settles Vance's policy. No fraud, just tragedy and greed. Cash or not." He glanced at the rubble burying Coulter. Maybe some things are better left lost. He looked at Martha and Silas, his expression softening. "What now, folks?" Martha looked at Silas. He was exhausted, in pain, but standing tall, a quiet strength radiating from him that had nothing to do with the arm he'd lost. She looked at the desolate ruins, then down at the serpent brooch in her hand, no longer a burden, but a relic of a closed chapter. She thought of her hidden fortune, the gold certificates, the emerald ring. Not an escape, a foundation. "Now," Martha Vance said, her voice clear and strong in the Wyoming wind, "we rebuild." She turned to Silas Boone. "If you're willing, Mr. Boone, a homestead needs a good carpenter, even one who improvises." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Silas looked at the ruins, then at Martha. He saw the fierce resilience, the promise kept, the future where he'd seen only ashes. He saw a purpose, a chance to build something new, not just with wood and stone, but with trust. He managed a small, genuine smile, the first in a long time. "Reckon I can manage, Mrs. Vance. One-handed or not, long as the architect has vision." He nodded towards the snow-covered land. "Where do we start?" As the first pale streaks of dawn lightened the storm-scoured sky, Martha Vance and Silas Boone stood side by side on the scarred earth of the Vance homestead. The ghosts were silent. The wind carried only the promise of a new day. Before them lay ashes, secrets buried, and the vast, challenging expanse of Wyoming. Behind them lay loss, duty fulfilled, and the unspoken understanding of a shared resilience. They had fortune enough, hidden gold, an emerald ring, and the far more valuable currency of hard-won trust and a future waiting to be built. Silas picked up a charred timber, testing its weight with his good hand, already planning the bracing for a new foundation. Martha tucked the serpent brooch safely away, her gaze fixed not on the past, but on the horizon. The rebuilding had begun.